Trivium. I think for those of you who are not joining live today but are watching later, just know that we are in the last leg of this book. So we're going to practically kind of put together almost 3 or 4 chapters, I think really chapters 12 through 16, but we missed chapter 12. So at least likely 13 through 16 together in one session. So before we begin, just wanted to check with at least Erlin and Dilip, you're online, and I think Asha is online too. How many chapters were you able to read? Were you able to finish the book? How far have you gone? Dilip, go ahead.
Yes. So I've read the book once, fully,
Okay.
but just this week, though I could read the 4 chapters, but I've read like the summary things in the end, and glanced through it. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah. Thanks, Dilip. Erlin, how about you? How far did you get?
I've read only till chapter 12, and even 12 I didn't complete, just halfway through.
Okay, so 13 through 15 you haven't finished.
No.
Okay, I do encourage you to finish the book so that tomorrow you will not.
Yeah.
I started the book and I haven't finished, because that's a big weakness I have. Part of the reason I selfishly started this book club is I want to finish reading this book. And I know if you had each other, you'd probably finish it. So, so yeah, I would definitely encourage you to finish reading the book. It's a good book. It's a challenging book. It does have some quirky pages, but I think overall it's a solid book. It kind of helps you in terms of your own thinking through how do you think the Trivium in your mind. The real paradigm, I think, more than just a curriculum, and I think the author rightly say it's not really about a curriculum, because often homeschooling parents start with a curriculum and then they fret and they fume and they get confused. But here what the authors are doing is they're saying you need to have a paradigm, a mental paradigm. And once you have that, it doesn't matter which curriculum you use, because you're going to be using that all through your life. So it's a paradigm where you, where you use the Trivium, which is basically you have foundational knowledge which you gain. Then you think through that knowledge by reasoning through it. And then finally you apply the knowledge you've gained in practical ways in your life. So there are 3 levels. You have knowledge, you have understanding, and wisdom. So it's that paradigm that they try to follow in every course of study, and they kind of help us through how do we do that in a practical fashion. Okay, so today what we will do is there are 2 hanging chapters in the book, which is basically the last 2, 15 and 16. 16 is really a conclusion. It's more, I would say, just a wrapping up of what the heart of the Trivium is. We'll come to that at the end. And of course, chapter 15 is really just questions. Once you finish homeschooling, what happens next? Do you send them to college? Do you not send them to college? Stuff like that. I mean, I wonder, do you think we should just finish 15 and 16 first and get it out of the way and then come to the summary of the Trivium? Are you guys okay with that approach?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, because then we're done with just what, the end part is. And then the meat of it is really getting clarity on how the Trivium is worked out through the ages. I realize that I have just read these chapters, and I should say this honestly, I was confused. Because either they're saying the same thing over for different ages, or there's really not enough meat for a particular subject that they're talking about. So what I did was I tried to kind of put my own table, and I started adding portions to that table which I thought the authors were missing out. Or let's say there were things which they were, if you look at that table which I've done, you'll come to see there's just heavy emphasis on a certain kind of learning. So I want us to be able to get that broad or large picture, so that tomorrow when you get into the Trivium, you're not kind of scratching your head wondering, why did I do this? It's just complicated. It's just too much of time. And so the last thing we want is for it to be a burden on parents and burden on the children. And I know that those who've been training classically do have weeping nights when they don't fully understand that they're doing the right thing, and it's just a heavy overload. And I should say this, I don't know if I think Dilip knows this, but Dilip, we're in the process of adopting a child with special needs. When he says special needs, he doesn't have mental special needs. He's physically challenged. But, I just realized when I finished reading this book, I was like, a lot of things, most of what I've just read, I'm not going to be able to do with this child. At least I don't see that happening across the horizon right now. There are so many other challenges that I need to kind of cross over when we're parenting this child. So, but still, it's a good book, generally in terms of helping, especially children, know how to cross those, levels in their education. So let's go to chapter 15 and 16. Get through that within like 5 to 10 minutes, and then come to the meat of the chapters, which is 12 through 14. So I think Dilip has read this. Maybe Dilip, can you just summarize for Asha and Erlin, and for the rest of them who may be listening, what's the crux of chapter 15? What's the main argument of chapter 15?
Yeah, chapter 15 for me was surprising because I've traditionally thought we homeschool and then they're ready for college at a certain age and then go on to earn their living. So here, surprised to, not fully surprised, but yeah, saw the 10 reasons not to go to college, which are basically the reasons we don't listed not to go to school as well. And then of course they do give us some methods where a degree can be got and I think that's there in the next chapter as well. But yeah, so
what were your feelings? Do you have any critical comments on their observations or some of the observations they were making? So I think just before that, Asha and Erlin, are you sort of clear on where this chapter heads? So this whole chapter is about, if you look at the picture of chapter 15, you get the idea. It's about a girl and a guy getting married, okay? So basically what happens after homeschooling? That's the main question. So a couple of arguments the authors make is, see, this is the age where you're learning wisdom unto life, which is really important, which means you're starting to make decisions which are wisdom decisions. You're no longer at the knowledge level, you're no longer at trying to understand things around you, but you're starting to really ask some serious questions in life about which direction you're going to head in terms of your skill sets, your career, your goals, your marriage, your family, and you're starting to ask those important questions. So the authors preempt or lead the whole discussion in a direction which is, they say, okay, how do you gain wisdom? Basically the question they're trying to answer is, how do you discern God's will for your life after this? Okay, that's the question they're trying to answer. But the way they put it is, how do you gain wisdom unto life? So they have a couple of ways in which you gain that wisdom. That is, you seek the counsel of elders, or especially your father and mother, your family. You seek a particular goal in life, and you need to have a vision or a goal. And if you don't have it, then start to figure out how to get there, by getting counsel and so on and so forth. They talk about necessities versus niceties, which means it's nice to do 10 different things in life, but are they really important? What is excellent versus what is good? You take up what is excellent, you forgo what is good. So you focus. So basically focus, stabilize. That's what they talk about. And then, of course, put yourself, there could be limitations, which could be your greatest opportunities, things which you start doing because of moral compulsion. There's some things you would not do, and there's some things you would do, which kind of starts you off on a particular track. For example, there's a good story about the beer industry. In the US, I think it started because, in Scotland, people used to get drunk on scotch, and scotch was pretty high alcohol. And so somebody who said, no, you can't have inebriation like this, of the sort. So they came up with this idea of fruit beer with very minimal level of alcohol, which you can enjoy, which sort of makes your stomach full. But at the same time, you don't get drunk on it. There's no way you can get drunk on beer. So the whole beer industry started because of an ethical or a moral compulsion. So things like that. There are some moral compulsions that lead you into a particular goal or a vision in life, something you want to do for life. and so on and so forth. What is a vision for a guy versus a girl, and they bring those out. And then, of course, like Dilip said, you have 10 reasons they outline, should you go to college or not. So the authors sort of lean towards the idea that it's not required to go to college. I don't think they would lean towards saying it's unbiblical to go to college. They would just say it's not required. You don't need to go to college. So that's the summary of chapter 15. Now, does anyone, like, especially I want to start with Dilip. Dilip, did you have, because you've read the chapter, were there critical concerns you had with this chapter and how it was going? And then after Dilip, maybe Erlin and Asha could add thoughts or questions as well, questions they may have on this chapter.
Right. I think one thing was, if yes, you can be an entrepreneur if you don't go to college, but then I think in the Indian system we are so used to, right, the campus recruitment. So if you don't go to college, then I mean, just the practicality of it. How will you go to an employer and say, I have the skills to be hired? Yes, you may do well in the interviews, but are employers ready to take a homeschooled candidate? I mean, at least in the professional space. So that was just a concern, if it could be adapted at this stage in India, if the child is not going to be an entrepreneur. But
Right.
yeah, that's the one thing I had.
Does anyone want to answer that concern, or do you all see it as a valid concern?
I do see it as a valid concern. I mean, I had a similar. I didn't read the entire chapter completely, but long back I've kind of glanced through the chapter, and I had a similar concern. I mean, is it really going to happen in India? I mean, at this moment, at least, it is a big struggle for those who don't have a college degree, to really get a decent job, I think.
Okay, Asha, you had anything to comment?
Yes, I think at the time that our older girls, were graduating from high school, I think we were in a phase where a lot of homeschoolers in our community were not thinking of college. So we didn't know what the best way to advise our children was. So we didn't push them. If they felt that they had a desire or a calling that would require a college degree, of course, we had college degrees. We were very supportive of that. But we want to push them in that direction. So we just gave them the freedom. So our oldest didn't go to college right away. She didn't have a clear sense of direction. But then our second born did have a much clearer sense of direction and calling. And I think it may depend on what area or calling that God has for you. And, just to pray and help your children discern that. And so she felt a college degree would be important. Now, looking back that all four of our children have gotten college degrees, I think they have earned the respect in their fields, which is like the passport to fulfill your calling, to get hired, to even be respected in ministry. So I can see advantages to it, but there may be areas of calling where it's not required. So there's no clear, right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
It just depends what the calling is.
Thank you, Asha. That was so wonderfully put. I think that's, out of the mouth of wisdom, I know Asha speaks out of much wisdom, because the church she's been part of and the culture she's been part of has pretty much embraced the idea, which a lot of people had embraced the idea of what's written in this book, no college degree, and so what do you do? But I think having worked through that culture, I think her answer is just bang on. I think it depends on what God is calling you to do. And usually by the time you're 16 or 18, you still don't know that. And I think what may help, I think it may help even Erlin and Dilip for you to think through this. Now, if you ask me, I would say that at least in India, the college degrees in India are just not good. And I can vouch for this. In fact, I think the trajectory for most people who do college here is you kind of have a really high level of education in your school with boards like CBSE and IGSE and ICSE, brilliant kids. And then when they go to college, if you don't go to the top 10 institutions here, kind of have a real bad drop in terms of your educational standards. So you wasted those 3 years, 2, 3 years of education on pretty bad colleges. And then you also realize that you're not industry ready. And I know this because, I mean, I worked in companies where I've hired people, and I know now companies talk about how most people who get out of college are just not industry ready. Don't have the skill sets. They're very proud and arrogant. They think they just got this, degree up their sleeve, and therefore they're worthy of hire. But most of them will confess saying these guys they just need to be retrained. It's almost like they're retraining them. So I remember when I got my first job in Infosys, I mean, thankfully I did do my college education was from a good college. I studied at BITS Pilani. But then I didn't do my engineering in BITS Pilani. This is the tragedy of it all. I did my master's in management, and I got an engineering job at Infosys. But Infosys had a 6 to 8 month training period where they would completely retrain you. It's like what you learned in 3 years or 4 years of engineering in college. You completely get retrained. Your way of thinking changes. Your way of understanding concepts changes. But within those 8 months, you're industry ready. You sort of learned the basics of swimming in a baby pool, and then they throw you into the sea, and then you have to figure it all out. So it was hard, but I think that's how industries think right now. They don't think that most college degrees are of any value. So I think in that sense, I do agree with where these authors are coming from. Now, if you ask me personally, I would say I'm not against college degrees at all. In fact, I would, if there is a good college which can, like Asha rightly said, fulfills or equips you for the calling that God has given you, whether it be an engineer or a scientist or a management grad or an entrepreneur. And if you think this college is going to give you or equip you for that calling, and you see a gap, then yes, do it. By all means, do it. I think the one area which in India we haven't really tried out, and this is the challenge that I have for homeschooling families, is the area of apprenticeship, which means that instead of taking up a 3-year college degree, which you probably don't, especially in India, if you're going to study in India, and if you're not studying from the IITs or the IIMs, then typically these colleges are not good. And if you're going to go there and spend your 3 years learning something which you can't put to use, would it be much better spent if you were doing an apprenticeship in the field on the calling that you have, by learning under probably someone who's willing to take you in as an intern or an apprenticeship? Volunteer yourself. Say, okay, I'm just coming here to learn. I want to lift up your hands. I want to serve you. And I want to learn the job. I want to learn on the go. I want to learn the job on the go. So when you do that, what you learn in those 3 years can go on your resume. You can say after schooling, you worked for 3 years or you worked for 2 years as an apprenticeship. These are the skill sets you've gained. These are things you've gained. I can guarantee, I think that if you are just going to study in India and not going to study abroad, that kind of experience will go a long way in you getting a far better job than if you just graduated from a college. You had a degree in hand, you had a bachelor's degree, and you want to go find a job. Now, if you ask me about masters, I think if you don't, of course, the problem is this, you're hitting a chicken and egg situation. If you don't have a bachelor's here, you can do a master's. And that is a real situation. The question is, if you want to do a higher degree, can you make an exception? Can you get an exception from a college by showing forth your skills that you've learned so much? So I don't know that situation yet. I'm not exactly sure you need to get a bachelor's in order to get a master's. Most colleges work that way. I think that's something that is worth kind of thinking through as well. So you have any questions or comments based on what I shared, any of you?
I mean, it's true sorry.
Go ahead, Arlen, then Dilip, yeah.
Yeah, it's true when I look back my 5 years, my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. Absolute waste. I mean, I don't think I learned anything from that. Though I studied in some of the best colleges in Bangalore, at least. I mean, Christ, I did my bachelor's, and master's I did in Joseph's. But honestly, I learned nothing. And when I went into, I was a teacher for the first 4 years after I finished my graduation. I mean, I didn't have to use anything that I learned. I had to, because I had a degree in English, people just expect me to teach English language, whereas you have a degree with English literature where they just taught you to just read different kind of novels, how to look at it differently. I mean, they didn't teach you English language such. So it was like a very different thing was expected from me. And I actually had to learn the whole thing as I, was working. So it is really a waste of time and waste of money. In my case, at least, it was true.
Right. So do you think if you had done English literature in college, the ideal thing for you to have gone into would have been journalism or editing, substantive, something where you're using your critical apparatus more in literature and not so much into teaching, because that would mean you need to do a teaching degree. Would that be right in saying that? Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, maybe so. But even otherwise, even if I had to get into, say, editing field or something like that, I think they didn't give us the required skills even there. I mean, honestly, looking at the degree we had, like you said, was just bad. So I really think if I have to compare myself with someone with a similar degree from the US or something, I mean, I cannot even stand against them. It's like that, it's just pathetic.
So then,
yeah.
Erlyn, would you suggest, I mean, going back to our history, because I come from a very similar history where thankfully now I am in management. I sort of made a full circle, came back to entrepreneurship and marketing and all of that. But not always it happens. So the question then is, would you rather have traded those 3 or 5 years that you spent learning English literature for actually starting to put your hands, let's say, on maybe even volunteering for Reformation Now and just learning to edit their work and things like that, and put it on your resume, and then would it have helped had you then gone into, editorial work or journalism after that? You think that would have held out prospects for you?
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I think when I first did my degree, Christ had a triple major degree at that time. You don't major in one particular subject, which is again confusing. So you're like, up until you're 21, 22 years of age, you don't know what you really want to do. You're just confused. There are different subjects you're studying, but none of them you're studying well. I mean, you're like basically jack of all trades, but master of nothing. So that's where you are. So I think there was always an uncertainty about what I really had to do, but you just go ahead doing something because the society expects you to, complete something in order to. So I think that's what I decided. I mean, going back, if I have to do it all over again, I probably wouldn't even do this subject. I would probably do something else that would have interested me much more. I actually like fine arts, so I might have done something with that, painting.
Well, just remember, you can still do fine arts. There are classes that you can take up. I'm saying this because, see, being in graphics design, I have to keep adopting my skills, and I realize my illustrative capacity is not industry ready. It's not up to the mark. So I have been wondering whether it's, there's an art school here, just like at the backside of my house. It's like 2 streets away. And they have a 6-month course where they teach you just illustrative art. You can take watercolor, you could do any particular media you want, or mixed media. But they basically put you on a regime where you're just doing something every day and they correct your skills. So for me, that's like gaining a skill set for my work. But I don't have to go to college to do it. I just need to take a course which helps me to practice and practice. Now you can even be self-tutored. You can do it online if you want. I think it depends on from person to person. If you have the discipline to do it online. Now, Venki and I do a lot of online courses to upskill ourselves. So we are part of this group called lynda.com, which is, like 8 weeks, 4 weeks crash courses. So 2 weeks crash courses on different areas of skill you want to gain. And to me, it's like ongoing college. I don't have, the bandwidth to go to college and get a graphics or fine arts degree. But I do have online courses I can take up to upskill myself for the job I'm doing. So I think it's that mentality that sort of carries, I would say, much earlier in life. So instead of looking at this just after you get a job, you're thinking of this mindset after your school when you're on the job. So if you're on a particular apprenticeship job, what skills do you need to gain? Can you get it online? Can you, and of course, because it's apprenticeship, you're volunteering. If you didn't like the job, great, no loss. You haven't wasted money for 1 or 2 years. Move on to something else and try out something else, and try it out till the time you realize, okay, this is what God is calling me for. This is what I want to put my skills in.
True.
Dilip, you wanted to share something.
No, just again the practicality of getting an apprenticeship. So that was just a question. Maybe we should, maybe in the Christian circle, see people who have companies and then are, are willing to take up students. So yeah, that was just a concern. Yeah.
Okay, a question for you, Dilip. Do students do apprenticeship today? Have you seen it?
Yes, but maybe after a degree. I'm not sure. I've not explored much there.
Right. So they do, you're right. So not after a degree, while they're still holding on to a degree, last year of their
Holding,
college,
yes. Yeah.
they don't have a
Uh-huh.
degree to show for apprenticeship. All they say is, I want to do a project with you. I'm studying in this college. So people sort of assume that, oh, okay, at the end of your college degree, you need to do a project, do a 3-month project with me.
Right.
The question is a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old going before college equally capable of doing that project? I think very much so. In fact, if he's going to be trained in a home where you're learning to work as you study and you're having a mindset that you need to work as you study, then he's far ahead of somebody who's just been schooled all the time and then who's been schooled outside the home, I meant, and who's gone to college because he's really now not learned what it means to work with his hands. So for him, apprenticeship is a completely new ballgame because he's never really learned to put his hands to work. But for a homeschool kid who's learning to study and work, and who's learning to work on projects in his last 2 years of education, working as an apprentice is actually not a big deal. In fact, if he can showcase his projects to an employer and say, "Hey, I've done these projects. I want to be able to get some real world experience." I think if he makes his case, he may be able to get a project. Now, again, if they say yes or no, that's still a question of, you can't predict what's going to happen. But I do know if you're able to persuade an employer that you are an asset to them, that you are really coming here not only to learn from them in a submissive fashion, but also to improve their value by adding something to them, then I think I'm pretty sure that they want you. They want to train you. And for all you know, they might even absorb you. You don't even have to go to college. They find out that you're really capable. I know of one friend here. I can mention this just to encourage you. In fact, the couple comes to our church, and their son is, I think, 15. He's a brilliant chap. He's homeschooled. In fact, he's homeschooled the classical way. But at some point, he just broke from the mold of even being homeschooled the classical way. He was an extremely creative guy. He had his own small business when they were away in a different country. Some really weird business, but it's an amazing, he just started earning a lot of money. So this guy would just not fit into the box of a college. It would be ruining his life. So now what he's doing is he started to apprentice, be an apprentice with, I think, Logos or Biblios or something like that. And he's learning, just system security and basically how to secure systems and ethical hacking and things like that, which is great because that's one area he wants to get into. And so a kid like that is an asset. When you go in a company, of course, he has a learning curve, and so does somebody who comes out of college. But he's way ahead of the curve because he started to work when he's just 15 or 16. By the time he's 18, even before he goes to college, he's probably fairly employable. And he could always do a college degree online just to supplement his skills. He knows that, okay, this is what he wants to do. Then he takes online college degrees or online courses that just helps to sharpen his skill in whichever area he's there. So I think that's definitely a possibility in the future. I think it's much less trodden path, definitely. But if you ask me, is it doable? I think it is definitely doable. It all depends on how well the education you give at home is. So far, so good?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add some thoughts. At one time in our homeschooling experience, apprenticeship was a big deal, especially those who were not considering college. Some people, families, it worked out well, but I feel from my own experience, there were many families who got disillusioned with that whole idea. They tried it, and their kids either couldn't find the right kind of apprenticeship opportunities that they were looking for, or even if they did, they had trouble finding a job afterwards. And so then they ended up, a lot of these kids going back to college to get a degree because they felt they were unsuccessful the apprenticeship way. And so I think it can work, but I've seen many cases where the families are now disillusioned and wish they hadn't been discouraged from sending their kids to college early. So, that could also happen. It may be hard just to find apprenticeship situations where people are willing to give you that chance. Even after you do, people still look for a degree as a passport to get into that field. And so you're just kind of dismissed. It doesn't happen to everybody, but I know several families where that has happened. In India, I don't know how that would work, but this is what happened in the US 10, 15 years ago.
I think, thanks for that tidbit, Asha. I wonder if the degrees in US, I don't know. See, the authors seem to say that even degrees in the US, I'm not exactly sure about that, because I do know, like my sister did her degree in the US and she was employable after the degree. I think the problem in India is the education they get in the colleges here are not employable at all. It's not industry. And I've known this from first-hand people I've spoken to, and I myself have kind of worked in that situation. And so, yeah, you're right. I think it's a risky deal because you're putting yourself to do, to work as an apprentice after schooling. But the way I look at it is, okay, don't look at it as a replacement for college. Is there something you can do between school and college? Let's say, for example, take 6 months off before you start college, do an apprenticeship. And if you like it, and if the employer likes you, then you can start working. If things don't pan out, like you rightly said, then at least you can get into college. You've tried it out for 6 months and you figured out that this is not the field you want to get into, or this is not working out. Then maybe it's best for you to, take up a college degree. It's just that even here, there was one person Venki and I counseled. He kind of got his bachelor's in computer science and wanted to do his master's in management. And I remember we were telling the person that, if you're not going to do a master's in management from one of the IIMs, at least the top 10 B schools, you're not going to be employable. And you can take that from us as a written note. Most companies are not going to value. You may have a 2-year MBA, but at the end of the day, you might be earning as much or even less than what a guy who had a bachelor's went and started learning on the job, started doing, because he just put himself into work. So, 3 years later, this person went and got an MBA, and guess what? Wasn't employable, and had to do a lot of apprenticeship works, and then realized that, what happens typically is you just think, you've got this feather on your hat, and you just, you think you've kind of, figured it all. And that's probably a really bad attitude to carry into work, because most employers want you to be submissive and learn the ropes before you get into actual projects. And most MBA grads will go and say, hey, I'm an MBA grad, you better give me my honor. But no, that's not how it works. And so a lot of these kids who come out of post-grad schools or grad schools, they just not employable. They don't have the right attitude for work. And so what happens is they start back at the rung, which they would have started maybe after their bachelor's or even pre-bachelor's, because they're almost kind of getting retrained. And so when you ask this person now, he would say, yeah, you guys were right. I should not have wasted that time. I should have just gone ahead, figured out if I could have taken up some job, even work as a volunteer for 6 months and then push my way through a company, which is fine because you learn it that way. Of course, now the person has a job, but still beginning at a fairly lower place. So I think it's also the return on investment of knowing, how much are you willing to invest into? What can you invest into to make sure you're employable at the end of a certain age? So yeah, I would agree with Asha that, try it, and if it try to work in small cycles and evaluate at the end of it. And if it doesn't work, find out, do you need to invest something more in order to get a better return? Or is that investment really a dead investment? At the end of the day, nobody's going to want you at the end of it. It's just the market, which is pretty bad. I think you need to ask macroeconomic questions like that too. Sometimes the industry is not great. So it's not that you're doing an apprenticeship, which is a problem, as much as the fact that, they don't have many jobs. So what are you going to do? So things like that, I think it'll be good for us to ask those questions too. Okay, we are running off time. So we're going to skip last chapter 16. It's just basically, I think, just the foundation for education. It's just 2 pages. The main thing which the authors here do is just talking about why you're educating your children at home, because you want to give them a good foundation, a solid foundation. You want them to learn the tools for learning, have a love for learning, and then help their children to have an attitude of respect and honor, and have a submissive servant spirit. And again, you do want them to establish stable homes, and you don't want them to make the mistake of going down, a career path that ruins, your future vision for your family and things like that. So, I think that's a summary of chapter 16. If you don't have any questions for chapter 16, we can go into 12 through 14, and we can go into the table I've created. Is that okay, Arlen and Dilip, Asha?
Yes, Sham.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, let's open that. Let me go back to my screen here. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. So what I did was, I have, in order to not complicate these 3 chapters, there's just a lot of information she's given. Honestly, none of us are going to go into the details now, because it's way beyond our scope. We don't have children who are in these age groups, especially the older ages. So what I did was, I just tabulated the various stages and how the trivium works itself out. Now, as I started doing this, I started to see problems. And I think you will start seeing it too as you start looking at it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yeah, I can.
Uh,
The font is a little small though, but yeah.
Is it small now? Is it still small? How about now?
Yeah, this is much better. Yeah.
Okay, it's much better. Okay. I think most of you who've read these chapters, especially chapters 11 through 14, 11, 12, 13, 14, know that each of these chapters covers a particular stage in life of the child, and how the trivium works itself out through the various subjects or curriculum or activities that are being done. So at the end of every chapter, from 11 through 14, the author summarizes or tabulates what happens in that particular stage in life. So if you go to page, let's say 339, for example, at the end of chapter 11, you have 10 things to do before age 10. And of course, the author is trying to keep it as just 10 things to do. I think for me, that is where it's a little problematic, because there are things that the other ages do which continues to be things which the younger ages do, and sometimes even more than that. They do a lot more than what the younger ages do, and we need to be cognizant of that. Now, as you can see here, what I've done is I've redone the left column. Basically, the 10 things to do, I've kind of put all the things that across the ages that you actually end up doing. And I've also, as I was kind of thinking through all the things that the children do, I broke down certain parts into smaller capsules, and I started looking at as to whether, is this really a redundant thing? Maybe we should not even be doing it. Okay, so here are things, for example. Let me just go back here as you look. So I've divided my columns into 4, as you can see. This is the early knowledge, which is 0 to 10 years. Later knowledge stage, which is 10 to 12 years. Understanding stage, 13 to 15 years. And wisdom stage, 16 to 18 years. So far, so good. Am I clear so far?
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So if most of you have read it, you have an idea of what I'm doing here. I'm just tabulating at the end of every chapter what is there, and I'm putting them all together. Now, if you notice here, the first thing she starts with is family worship. I think is a very important piece. They talk about doing it in the morning or evening, whichever works. In fact, the authors kind of say do it morning and evening. I'm a little nervous about that because honestly, the kind of culture we are living in is not a farm culture. The authors are in a far more controlled culture where their life revolves around the farm, the family is around the farm. So there's very, very less distraction and much, much greater, I would say, schedule. Indian culture is not a very scheduled culture. And I think if families can even do worship together once a day, you have a great, great start. I mean, you're just a long way off from most families. Would you guys agree with me, or do you have other thoughts?
Yes. Is personal devotion mentioned here, or is that assumed it's done before this?
Yeah, you can. So here's the thing, Dilip. I think the authors would talk about 10 to 15 minutes of private devotion, if you can do it.
Private, yes.
Here, my rationale, at least our family's rationale, is this. Family worship precedes or comes before individual worship. The reason for that is, I think God wants us to kind of learn to worship corporately. That's pleases to Him. You know, the Lord loves the gates of Zion more than all the tents of where Jacob dwells. Of course, that's corporate church worship. The Lord is present there in a very special way. But then you mentioned the tents of Jacob there because it is talking about worshiping within the family. I think most often, if we grow up in EU backgrounds or in interdenominational Bible studies, the emphasis has strongly been or heavily been on private worship discipline, sometimes at the expense of family worship. I think a good reversal of that is that you do have to learn to worship together as a family first, and then if you have the time, do your private Bible reading or do your Bible study, whatever it is. The reason for this is little children are not going to know how to do that privately. They need to be taught. And the more you do it as a family, the more the children will absorb Sunday morning worship. They will learn what it means to sit quietly, what it means to listen to God's word, what it means to pay attention, things like that, which if you kind of put the emphasis on individual worship, some of these kids are going to lose out on that. So I think my personal way of thinking is, if you have to choose between family worship and individual worship, I would say go for family worship. Again, encourage the children, especially the older children, about 10 years of age, to at least worship the Lord privately, to say their private prayers. If they can start reading, to read the Bible on their own, if they already become Bible literate, that's where the family worship helps. You start to memorize scripture, you catechize them, and that is part of their individual worship too. They're being aided by their parents to know how to worship God. So does that make sense, Philip?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
So that's just my take, and I found this to be helpful in our own family. I mean, we don't have children, of course, but see, we became Christians in our college years, definitely the age where we have greater literacy, greater breadth of being able to do individual worship on our own. But when you start a family, you want to be careful that you are not in your own islands doing your own private worship, because kids are not going to get that. They can see their dad and mom worshiping, but they have to be discipled into it, which is why family worship is very important. And this is especially for covenant families where you have Christian children who are kind of being nurtured in the Lord. You're having especially homeschooling happening. You do want to have, one of those cornerstones is family worship. So if you see here, what I've done here is the authors sort of, I think in my thinking, they confuse biblical education with family worship. So if you go through the chapters, they ask you to do in family worship a lot of what is to be done in biblical education, which is, it could be systematic theology, it could be hermeneutics, it could be knowing how to study the Bible. I don't think those are things you need to take up in family worship. Family worship is family bonding time in the Lord. It's a time where you enjoy each other, enjoy the Lord. If anything, it has to foster in you a love for God and a love for the things of God. I think that's the goal of family worship. You want to surround your family around God, around Christ. And you do that by various things. And here I've written just a couple of things you do. You do learn to pray together. Of course, initially it would be the father who's leading, but I do think it'll be good for children to know how to learn to pray, just as how Jesus taught his disciples. If you can take turns and pray for different requests, that your church has a particular hymnal. In our church, we use the Psalter, so you teach them how to sing through that so that they're ready for worshiping the Lord on the Lord's Day. Again, you do a particular scripture reading. One thing you don't want to do in family worship is start reading biblical history books, or you don't want to start doing devotional literature. A lot of families may do that. They're good for a season, but the staple diet needs to be, you study the scripture, or you just read the scripture and you meditate on it. You want to know what is God speaking to you through the scriptures for the day. So I think scripture reading, meditation is good. Now, the authors heavily lean on the father leading and the children being recipients, or the mother being recipient of scripture, which is finally okay. I think fairly typical of families. But I do think family worship is a time where you should learn how to express your heart to God. It'll be good for children to share what are they learning from scripture. What is God speaking to them? Or the mother can also kind of explain the scripture a little bit to the children. That's fine. I mean, I think, both father and mother have the mantle of teaching the children, and that's okay. Then this is the time where you do scripture memorization. So as you can see, as the ages go up, it's a different kind of memorization. So for the little children less than 10, you can just do one verse, or you can do verse and song, or you can do children's catechism in song or without song, however the children learns. And then for the older children, as they grow or mature, you start to have slightly bigger portions of scripture memory that they can do. And then, of course, they can do catechisms. And as they go into wisdom age, I think adults can sort of maybe read through confessions, a portion of the confession, and probably explain what it means or things like that. Again, smaller children can be excused. If it's beyond their capacity, you can finish it quickly and then maybe have a time with the older children. The father can lead the older children on that front. So this is my understanding of what can be done in family worship. Do you guys have any other thoughts in this? Are you guys still there?
Yes. No, I think for me it was good learning because I valued individual worship more than family worship. But yes, if children are not able to see worship as a family, then Sunday they are less equipped to sit through service. So yeah.
Yeah, in fact, actually, Dilip, I can tell you a live example of that in the church I used to be part of. It was one family. It's amazing. It's an amazing story. Wife was a Christian, husband was not. Wife loved the Lord, but it's hard when you have these two children growing up, little children who are growing up. And what happened was the constant habit for most churches is, hey, kids are not ready to listen to adult sermons, so just take them out into Sunday school. Make sure there's a small Sunday church for the children. But what they fail to acknowledge is, see, we all know there's a problem, okay, but we're not kind of solving the problem the right way. So I think that's where all of the issues start. So the problem is the children don't know how to sit through, Sunday worship. If you look at the scriptures, Jesus clearly says, let the little children come to me, and out of the mouths and lips of infants I've ordained praise. So, there's an expectation that children are wanted in worship, that Jesus wants them in worship. And Jesus wants to nourish them and grow them. So when you take them out of worship, you take away that privilege that God is giving these children. The problem is that some of these children can't sit still. They're kind of crying, or they don't know what to do. They're irritated, frustrated. So this family, similar thing happened. They kind of, the church decided not to have a separate Sunday, Sunday school for children during service. They said, okay, let's incorporate the children and see what happens. And it was a chaos. I mean, the kids were restless. They were running around. And then the parents got really, discouraged. And they were like, what do we do? We should probably go back and start Sunday school and worship. And I remember at that time, Venki and I were like, no, there's another way to deal with this problem. And that is, why don't you start just doing family worship every day in your family? And tell them this is like a practice session before Sunday worship. Just start, all you do is sing a song together, read the Bible, just keep it for 15-20 minutes, not even more than that. Read the Bible, ask questions, and then pray for people. And you know what happened is this family started doing this, and slowly a couple of things started to change. The kids started to slow down at church. They really started to slow down. And then the husband was not a Christian, but he had to lead family worship. That was the interesting part. Well, the mother helped, definitely. But through the course of doing that, and one particular day, this husband actually prayed the prayer of repentance. He was convicted from the word, and he asked forgiveness from the Lord. He became a Christian one of those times. And then it continued. Family worship continued, and these kids started coming to church. And then after many weeks, maybe even just a month or two, it didn't take a lot of time, these kids started to listen to the sermon. And they would go home and ask their parents questions about this. They started to grow. Their mind started to expand. And now both these children are in church and they're taking notes. And some pastors came and they just looked at the notes of one of these kids and they were like, wow, okay. This is way beyond what I can imagine. But it all started with a simple discipline of just taking a few minutes off your everyday doing family worship. Now, it may not happen. This case may be different for different families. But I know in the case of this family, it did help prepare these children for worship. It did encourage these children to know God as their God and to really seek Him. So I think it's just an encouragement for you all that it's not just some routine thing we do every day. It's really a way in which we teach our children to see God every day and to see God especially in His house of worship. When they come there, to know that they can come expectant to hear God speak to them. Okay, so should we move on? Do you have any other thoughts to share?
We can move on, Shami. That's good. Yeah.
Okay, so what I've done here is I have separated biblical education from family worship with a reason. Okay, now I've written that preferably after worship, mother reads the Great Covenant story for 30 minutes. I have actually placed this here after having seen an example of one family who's done this very, very well. The lady is like a mother to me for many, many years. All she did was she read this great covenant story. Covenant story means basically the whole story of the Bible as one big story, not as like smaller story chunks. If you guys need help, a good book to read would be a book by the name The Children's Story Bible by Catherine Voss. So what it does is it tells the whole biblical story as one story, which means every chapter is linked to the previous chapter. It's not like, okay, let's today read Noah's story, tomorrow read Abraham's story. No. It's talking about how God is seeking out a people for Himself in every story, and so it climaxes in Christ coming. So it's a beautiful story. Now, when you do that, in many ways, you are, like I mentioned here, you're teaching them good biblical theology. You're teaching them how God saves people throughout history. And you're building those foundational blocks for biblical theology. And this could be a time where the mother can read out the story or tell the story, whichever is easy for them. And let the children ask questions, knowledge level questions, ages 10 through 12. 0 to 12, and then 13 to 15, they can ask more why questions. Why did David sin? Why did he do that? Why did he do what he did with Uriah? Questions like that. And then you start to get into foundational systematic theology. When you answer the why questions, you can talk about the doctrine of sin, you can talk about the doctrine of God, doctrine of Christ, but you're really answering those or building those foundational blocks as you're teaching them the whole covenant story. And of course, the later level kids can also listen to the same thing, but in their own self, they can do a self-study of, biblical hermeneutics, knowing how to study the Bible for themselves, more, deeper systematic theology or a self-study of the Bible. So I think in biblical education, you need to graduate through these levels. I personally would recommend that you keep family worship and biblical education separate, because you do want to delve deep in biblical education. You don't want to see the Bible as a textbook for life, and you want to learn to grow in it. So to answer your question, Dilip, I think personal Bible study will come here, but your personal devotion will come somewhere here. Again, if you can find time, great. Spend some time in the night, perhaps praying, singing a psalm and reading. But if not, remember, you can always cover that in your personal Bible study. It is a meditative exercise too. So you can do it at that time. So far, so good. We okay on row number 4?
Yes.
Okay. Erlen, do you have any questions? Are you still there?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Asha, feel free to add anything you might want to add. I'm okay with that. Are you still there, Asha? She's muted. Okay. Now, if you see here, before I go into the next few details, just take a look at all the columns. Family worship, Bible education, okay, which is all biblical religious studies. Then you have listening or reading aloud, which the authors talk about. Okay, all of you there. Then you have oral narration or written narration, depending on which age group you're in. Then you have playtime is what I've added there. Of course, you can do that. And there's reading, there's writing, there's language. Think about it. You know, I would say almost, in fact, include logic in it. You have almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different ways of learning one thing, which is basically communication language. I'm a little nervous about this, guys. Do you have any concerns or questions? I mean, how much time do you spend on learning to master languages or to master communication? Did you guys have concerns reading all of those chapters, or is it just I who's having a concern? Or maybe correct my concern if I'm having a wrong concern.
Yeah, for me, the way I thought about homeschooling was, say, by the age of 10, 12, we get a fair understanding of where the child's interest lies, where they have that ability to excel, and spend more time there. So if math is the area where a child will excel in and establish their career there, then probably that is increased and the others are decreased.
Okay. So you would be having more of an elective type learning, maybe after the understanding age. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Erlen, did you have any? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Finish what you're saying.
No, that's what I thought of, but yeah.
Erlen, did you have any thoughts?
I kind of understood the authors as saying that you learn all the different subjects like math and logic and everything, but as the vocabulary of any field being the most important. I mean, maybe I got them wrong. I don't know.
Maybe you're right there. My only concern was, see, to me, it seems like this kind of training, if you're kind of heavy on languages and rhetoric and logic and reading, speech, debates, writing, likely the kind of people or the kind of fields that your children are going to go to is liberal arts, okay? Most likely. If you're going to have a heavy emphasis, and I'm saying this keeping the long-term perspective in mind, we want to be able to see 10, 20 years from now, if you have a certain emphasis in education, what kind of children, in this sense, what is the likely field they're going to get into? Am I right? So a lot of listening to books, reading books, writing, letter writing, learning different languages, learning to speak well, learning to have logical understanding of debates is likely going to make you a good communicator, a very good communicator. You will get into the field of writing, or you'll get into the field of being politically involved, especially if you're going to do history. You're likely going to have a golden tongue, a golden mouth, like they would say. You're going to be able to influence people. Is that something good to have at any stage, any part of life? Yes. I think in any field, you need to have great communication skills. You need to have the art of persuasion. You need to know that. So in that sense, these are great skills to develop. My only concern is if that's happening at the expense of, let's say, math or science or music and art. And I do agree with, to some extent, with Dilip in that you need to know what is your child shaped as. There are children who are never going to be having great language skills, and you can wire it into them, drill it into them, read all the best books to them, help them learn 2, 3 languages. They're going to be extremely exasperated because for them, their giftedness or the way they've got to shape them is not in great language, but the great use of their hands. They might be great with science, or maybe they'll be great with, let's say, with music and art, perhaps. So I think one of the things to keep in mind is if you have a certain kind of education, let's say if you're heavy on the rhetoric and the language arts, then you're likely going to build great communicators, great orators, great leaders. But not all our children are ready for that. And we should be careful not to break the spirit of our children by putting them on a rigor or into something which they are not molded for. And I know this also from another family who was doing classical education. They had about 5, 6 children. The oldest one was just great. I mean, she was the person who loved to read. She was the introvert, loved to read, loved to study, very structured. This would be great for her. There was the second or third one, I think. No, second one. This kid was just, completely a creative dreamer. He was a dreamer. So, and I remember watching that child, his spirit was really breaking because he was put through the classical method and he was asked to do a lot of math, a lot of reading and writing, and it was crushing his spirit. So I think we want to be sensitive. Again, I'm saying this not because I'm not pro Trivium at all, but we want to be sensitive to the spirit of our children. We want to know how they learn well. And yes, we want to give them a good vocabulary where they are, but we also want to make sure they're developing in areas where they have a natural bent or an affinity and grow them in those areas and not force them into areas where they don't have a natural affinity. For all you know, there'll be some kids who will never be able to learn a second or third language, and that's fine. There'll be kids who may not have a great handwriting. That's fine. They may not be the Wordsworth in your family. That's fine. So which means sometimes they'll probably be in the early knowledge level where they're still an understanding level. But they'll be probably excelling in music and art. They might be great with a piano, with a particular instrument or something of that sort. So, I just want to kind of give that caution early on because I do know that this education or this plan that they've put together is great if you're going to build leaders for a nation. People are going to be excellent communicators and orators. I just know that not all children are geared for that. And we want to be sensitive to that. Any questions there?
No, Shami, we're good. Yeah.
Okay, Erlen, do you have any thoughts on that front of what I shared?
Yeah, I did feel a concern as to why they were never mentioning anything like music, and playtime and things like that. So, yeah, I do agree with what you said.
Yeah, I just want, because this is a foundational book for all of us. And remember, where we put our eggs, which baskets we put our eggs in, is going to take a long time for us to see its fruit. So, yeah, if you ask me, I would give more emphasis, let's say, to math, science, and music and art education. Again, not more emphasis, at least equal emphasis as much as is for language. Because we are living in a technological age where some of these are really, really important. You don't want to mold your kids just in one way of thinking, which is very classical or maybe old school. So we want to give them the toolkit for a modern education as well, and help them to develop the Trivium in that. So I'm all for the Trivium. I'm all for having a Trivium mindset. But I don't want us to be stuck in time where we're doing a particular way of learning which is completely out of step with what is happening today. So yes, Erlen, I can tell you, I felt the same thing. I just felt the math, the science, and the music and art was so low-key. There was so much more on history. There was so much more on reading and writing and logic that she was kind of mentioning, the authors were mentioning. but there was such less emphasis on music, art, science, and math, which was a little concerning for me, because we are in a scientific age and we need to be sure that our children know how to do that. Now, she did encourage me at the end of a chapter where she said, once her kids learned how to, have good writing and logic skills and all of that, they came to science, they went straight into experimentation. That was encouraging, because it seems like it does give you a certain way of thinking when you have the right, foundational pieces in place. So I'm hoping that, we'll be able to explore more there. Okay, so as you can see here, I've written in oral narration, and we're going to finish with this maybe in the next 15 minutes or so, and then we'll close. So oral narration or written narration, I think most of you must have read. Again, you can do it in the morning, maybe after Bible education. The early knowledge stage, you are, sorry, did I miss this one? Sorry, I did miss column 5, row 5, let me go back to that. Listening or reading aloud. This is a great part. The reading aloud and narration is just wonderful. So as she talks about it, you do it while the child is working on something, some activity. It could be an art and craft, it could be some creative activity. Great. So essentially, in the early knowledge stage, you teach them, read easier literature for them, maybe with sight reading, if you can. Later knowledge, through the wisdom stage, you start to learn, read classical books, or like classics essentially, or you read historical fiction, biographies. Read good books with your children. That's the main thing. Help them to gain a love for just good literature, good storytelling. Any day, great. I think I know of a lot of children who just, by just reading, by their parents reading out a lot of literature, have just gained so much wisdom and understanding and have a love for learning. I think it really fosters a love for learning. The question I did have is, can we do away with this if you're focusing on biblical theology or reading aloud for those under 10? I don't know, do you guys have questions? I think if you're able to read aloud through another part of the day, maybe even just for half an hour, or just reduce the amount of time you spend. I do think reading aloud the covenant story or telling them the whole biblical story through the covenants is so important. I've known pastors, missionaries who've said, when I went to college, the one thing that helped me going and helped me develop my systematic theology is having a good understanding of the big picture of the Bible and being catechized. So I think it's really important to have this piece in your family. And of course, it's great to read aloud if you have the time, half an hour, maybe an hour of your day to do that, preferably in the afternoon when the kids are a little low-key and just want to do something creative. So that's what the authors also talk about. Any questions there? Any comments?
No, sure.
Okay. Oral narration or written narration, again, this is the place where the authors say, okay, anything that you've read, the previous day with your mom, or especially the mom has read aloud something, can you narrate it back in your own words? Maybe just take 5 minutes. So for little children, can they just narrate whatever they remember in 5 minutes so that they're developing the skill of articulation? They're learning to communicate in language. And as they grow older in the later knowledge stage, you're teaching them more oral interpretation, which means you're correcting their grammar rules, telling them, how you structure a sentence when they speak, or maybe in terms of intonation, the choice of words they use. So you're helping them gently correct how best they can narrate or articulate. And then when they go into the understanding level, you're really teaching them the art of rhetoric. So they give the authors give some very good books on that, where you learn how to speak confidently. So you can just use the stories that were told the previous day, the fiction work that you've read to them the previous day, and ask them, can they narrate it with greater rhetoric, with greater facial expressions and body gestures? How can they do that in an interesting fashion? Or it could be a time of critical apparatus where they have an interpretation of what they read or what they listened to, or a book that they're reading at the understanding level to improve their orality. And then in the final wisdom stage, again, you do the same thing. But here they can also get into written narration. So sometimes they start writing book reviews, or they start to write down whatever they read the previous day, like give book summaries or essays and things like that. This would sort of also collide with their writing exercise. They do a little bit of journaling or creative writing. It could go well with what they're doing here in written narration. Now, one thing I've added here for creativity and I found this to be very helpful, is to do something called table topics. Okay, now you may not have an oral narration of, let's say, everything that mummy read the previous day, like whatever you do during the reading aloud time. But you could have fun table topics, like a table topic is, if you go for any, let's say a Toastmasters or a club like that, they would have what's called a table topic, a 1-minute table topic or a 5-minute table topic. So a table topic is where they'll give a topic to talk about, like it could be, let's say a picnic in Lal Bagh, okay, or something like that, or maybe my dog, my pet, or what I read yesterday. So it could be anything. It could be on kindness. So all you have to do is talk about that just extemporaneously for a minute. So little children will learn to just speak about that topic. They learn to become real conversationalists. And older children or older students will start to really learn how do you influence people on a topic like this in 1 minute or 2 minutes? How can you really have meat in a message? So they're thinking through not just the topic, but they're thinking logic, they're thinking content based on everything they've read perhaps. They can talk about that. So that's another way in which you help them develop their orality or their speech. Okay, so is that clear? Is this row sort of clear? Do you have any questions on that?
No,
I
no.
think it's
Who's it? Dilip, are you saying something?
I just said it's good to recollect what we've done the previous day or what we've done through the day. So it's good.
Right. Arvind, you had something to share?
No, Shami.
Okay. So far so good. So what I'm doing here is I'm just tabling the very same things the authors have done, giving a summary for all of you, just to recap what happened in these big chapters that we missed out. And I'm adding some things which I think would be good and useful as you go on. Again, playtime, your kids do need that. Again, this is apart from craft time, when they're working with modeling clay, when we're having reading aloud times. So I would encourage you, if you can take them out for a walk in the park, perhaps all the children, just help them to get outdoors. I mean, homeschooling can be really a drudgery if all you do is sitting at home and doing stuff. So just take them outdoors. Encourage children to go out and play with the apartment children. 5 to 6:30 is a great time for that because kids will come back from school. Maybe they finish their tuitions and they just need some time to play. So that's a time where they can go out and play, bicycle around, perhaps learn a new skill, swim around. So do all of that, just keep at least 2 hours, 2.5 hours a day, just for really fun things that you can do as a family. Field visits, you can do at that time. I mean, there could be days when you don't do homeschooling. All you do is go to a museum or go to the library here or go to an old age home or go to an orphanage and just spend time with the children there. So just think of things like that where you're really taking time off your schedule and not just. So yeah, playtime is important. Then reading is a sense of letters and grammar. I mean, basically doing your own reading. Again, reading and writing and language go hand in hand. So for the early, so you can do this late morning, perhaps, after your oral narration work or after your break times. So for the early knowledge, it's usually phonics. You're developing a good sense of sound and being able to read, look at letters and read them. So these are the things where you really gain literacy. These three: reading, writing, and language. Oral narration and listening and reading aloud is just basically helping them to be communicative. You're just teaching them how to speak. Okay, so you don't need to have necessarily great literacy to do this, but here you're gaining literacy skills. So in reading, your early knowledge, you're doing phonics. Later knowledge, you're doing. You can basically read the same things or different things that you're doing in the listening section. So it could be historical fiction, biographies, so on and so forth. And the authors here, I think in the late knowledge and understanding level and wisdom, they say it may be good for you to combine your reading with your history. But remember, just keep in mind that when you do that, you're starting to develop a certain way of thinking, which is you're mostly doing a lot of reading around history or historical fiction, but not really giving way for other kinds of literature. It could be fantasy, it could be, let's say, non-fiction, maybe work of related to science or related to music, things like that. So just keep in mind that, yes, it's a good idea to sometimes combine it with history, but try not to do all the reading as historical fiction or biographies. It's good to have some of that. They can do some good devotional reading. They can do some theological reading. They could do other kinds of reading as well. So just keep that in mind. Broaden the horizon for reading. This will really blossom your children into various fields. There could be things they may be reading in books. They'll say, Mommy, I want to be like this person in this book. I really want to. They might just be so inspired by certain characters in books or certain things they read. Say, I want to really do that. So just keep that in mind while you do reading. Any questions so far on reading?
No, Shami.
Okay, so moving on to writing. Again, this is a literacy development activity. You can do it late evening, perhaps. I don't know where else. Depending on your schedule, you guys can decide. I've just put it based on what it seems like it would work. So if you do writing for children, it has to be cursive writing or copy work. And then you have to maintain an English language notebook. That's what she talks about. So this can include drawings. It could be craft work. Like, for example, they're learning to write letter A. It could be, putting rice, making a craft work with rice, filling the whole letter A with rice, or, maybe putting woolen strings for cursive writing. English notebook can be really creative, depending on the age they're in, or depending on the child. The later knowledge you're getting into, since you're learning grammar by this time and language together, you get into basic composition. So you talk about subject, predicate. So you talk about writing sentences together. If you can start copy working scripture verses, that'd be great. Then grammar along with it. Then you get into letter writing or journaling. So this is the age where you may scribble a little, but your handwriting starts to slowly improve. You're starting to make sense of sentences. So in the later understanding age, you're getting more and more into a little bit more complex writing, where you're outlining, you're journaling. You start to get into essay writing. So you write on, let's say, my pet, or what did I do in school today? Things like that, just a one-page essay where you've already grasped the grammar rules. You're starting to write a story. You're starting to tell a story. So you're getting into creative. And again, in this stage, you're also starting to dabble with another language. Maybe you're starting to read and write in another language. It could be Hindi, it could be Tamil, it could be Kannada. But remember, English and the other language go hand in hand. You do have one primary communicating language, verbal communication, but you're starting to get literate in more than one language. So depending on your child's skill, just start working on that. And finally, in the wisdom stage in writing, you're getting into articles and research writing. So they talk about Strunk and White's research writing, or different ways of writing papers. So here, let's say you're doing a history project or you're doing a science project. Your writing and your history project and your science project go hand in hand. So you're starting to do a lot of research work. You're putting a paper, perhaps you're getting into creative writing. You're writing a book or a novel. You're doing a lot of journaling. And also remember, just keep in mind your language and writing go hand in hand. Let's say you want to do a research work on, let's say, the Ramayana or Mahabharata or something, some early work in Sanskrit, for example. Remember, reading and writing skills enough for you to do that. So you're starting to become proficient in more than one language, not just in English. You're learning to, let's say, read a book by a Tamil book, maybe by an author, and critically review it. You read it and then you write in Tamil a critical review of that particular book. So see, this is an age where you're really starting to blossom in languages. You're starting to articulate yourself in more than one language. So just keep that in mind. It's very easy for us to remember that this whole reading, writing, and language can just happen in English, because English literature is available. Just keep in mind, you're doing these three. These three are foundational blocks for literacy in any language. So you remember you're doing it in English and one other language possibly. It could be Tamil, it could be Hindi, or it could be Sanskrit, but you're starting to read literature, write on in that language and build the grammar rules for this language. So any reading language.
No, Shami, I think that this is really good. And just on a side question,
Sure.
the order can be any way the child wants, right? Especially, say, in the later knowledge or understanding level, so that it doesn't become like a school schedule where they think, okay, 10 to
No,
11
no,
is this. Yeah. So,
no. The order you just when Dilip, did you mean the schedule or did you mean when they're learning what?
no, the schedule of the day. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
When they're learning. Yeah.
This is just this is what I put in as what I'm thinking of. But you guys can do it any which way you want. Just remember, nobody is saying you should do reading, writing, arithmetic, everything on a single day. You remember, even when we went to school, do you remember, we didn't have some subjects every day, right? Math was just twice a week or thrice a week, correct? Play was just once, maybe twice a week. And you had science just twice a week, your language every day. So keep that in mind. There's only so much time in the day. And so there could be some things they have to do every day. And I think reading and writing is something we can do every day because you need to keep up with language skills. But science and math, for example, you can do it just twice a week or thrice a week. So just flex your schedule. I think the authors also, when I see their schedule, I get really nervous because I don't think I can ever have that kind of a airtight schedule. I will probably exasperate. I mean, my house would be in a chaos if I did that. But you can choose how many subjects you want to do in a day, depending on what your priorities are. If you think math is important for your family, just do math every day, and things like that. So just flex yourself. Make sure you have enough time for breathing, for them to enjoy the day. And see, the goal of education is, of course, all said and done, the authors may talk about the quivers going out, they're being taken care of, the dominion mandate, blah, blah, blah. You ask me, I'll say the goal of education is to love God, is to love the world He's made, is to enjoy everything that He's made. So at the end of the day, if they don't enjoy what they're learning, if they don't enjoy God and enjoy the things He's made through their learning, then we're really breaking the spirit of children. So you want to be careful not to put them on some kind of a factory schedule where everything is kind of clockwork. Give them space to breathe. Give them time to breathe. There could be days where you're completely unstructured. It's not a day that's going to work out. That's fine. Just go out, do something, get a breath of fresh air. That's perfectly fine. So I've just put this here saying what could work in your schedule. I can look at this and say it's not going to work for me, actually. I could pluck out a lot of things from here, say it's not going to work. I'm just going to do a couple of things every day. Push math, push science to maybe twice or thrice a week. So does that make sense, Dilip?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, going on to math. We want to wrap up real quick here. The author does say in math, math fundamentals. This was a bit of a shock for me the last time when we discussed, but then the more I've thought about it, especially even with my own son who's going to come, I realized that is so true. Children till the age of 10 learn sense in a sensory way, which means they learn with things they can see, taste, touch, feel, and hear. So a lot of your fundamental math is going to come maybe in the kitchen, maybe in, when you're doing laundry, when you're doing clay modeling, doing just basic stuff, just like how your language skills come when you're doing everyday stuff, right? By just teaching them what you're teaching them. You take them to the grocery store and tell them all the vegetables you're buying. You take them to let's say a museum and show them all this. So you're helping them gain a vocabulary through the senses. So fundamental math for children also begins the same way. They will learn how proportions work by you doing something in the kitchen. They learn to look at the clock, look at time. They learn proportions that way. They learn to do a lot of addition by things they put into their toy basket, things like that, by the Lego blocks that they're building. So you use a lot of sensory play in math. And you'll be surprised at how much math they will gain by the time they become 10 years, 11 years of age. So much so that the authors say that you can do 6th through 8th grade math when they're 10 to 12 years of age, later knowledge age, which is pretty amazing. So it's essentially going through pre-algebra, just, you're talking about division and divisibility, and then you're talking about just basic pre-algebra and things like that. So, and I would typically agree with this. It's good to, if you can put off a lot of the multiplication, division, divisibility, all of that for later, try to see if you can use things around the home to teach them basic math. You can do math games, you can do memory games, do a lot of games with which they learn math. Do play Monopoly, for example, for them to learn currency, addition, subtraction, all of that. So that's one. The understanding level, you really get into algebra and geometry. Now, I do think in our school systems, we learned even trigonometry at this age. But again, I don't want to go necessarily by our school system because we cram a lot of fundamental math into 5 or 7-year-old brains. And I agree with the authors. I don't think children have the capacity for abstraction at that age. Till about 10 years of age, they're very concrete. We will do them a lot of good and service if we can just keep to the concrete math at these younger ages, help them to just use their concrete thinking to start building the blocks of math, and then go into abstraction when they go into the later knowledge or understanding level. And then finally, in wisdom level, you learn geometry, trigonometry, calculus, and advanced math. I think a lot of the math really starts to get done in these 2 ages, which is basically after you're 13, through school. So these some of it, like for example, reading and writing, a lot of the building of grammar starts to reduce at these ages. You start to get into much more math education at these ages, but your math will be very much more sensory and low level in these earlier ages. So any questions on math?
Shami, do you think it's even necessary to go into the logic and the rhetoric stage of math if the child is not interested in math or does not have the skill to, to kind of understand the mathematics?
Yeah, I think, see, some kids will not be able to grasp, let's say, advanced math or trigonometry and things like that. Just remember, these are, if you want your child to go to college, these are basic courses you need to get through. Now, they may not score great, okay? See, I don't know. The thing is, it's a hard question to answer. Do I forego a subject because the child doesn't get it? Or do I want the child to get incorporated into a system and therefore I kind of force the child to go that mile even though they may not like it? Just get through it. Just do the basic and get through it. I don't know. I think it all depends on your own philosophy of education. My philosophy would be, my child doesn't get algebra and geometry and they're not going to use it in their life, I'd probably forego it. If I'm going to do that, then I should be fairly clear, I'm not going to get a math education for my child. They're going to get into liberal arts or something else. So in their bachelor's, they'll have nothing to do with math. They'll only have fundamental math to do with or to use in life and nothing else. So I think it all depends on your own vision for your own family and what philosophy of education you follow. If you want to incorporate them into college, into engineering colleges or any science background, then you have to get through math. There's just no two ways. I mean, I hated math. I'll be honest. If you ask me, I probably love math now if I teach my children. But I hated math. My math education was bad, very bad. So when I went to college, I really struggled. When my 12th grade, I got 99% in math. Now you'll probably say, wow, great, that's great. But I can honestly tell you, most of that was just, I learned how to solve a few problems and just kind of stuck it out. But when I went to college, I really understood I did not know math at all. I struggled because my understanding of abstract math was just terrible. And I really learned a lot of my basic math only when I went to college. I was way behind. So sometimes it will break your children's spirit because you will force your children to regurgitate, go through school. And when you go to college and they have to do math, they'll be failures. They just really fail. So just feel your way through your children. If they can't, my gut feel is this, if you put the fundamentals right, if you put the good stones in the right place in the early ages, they will start to love math. And I can tell you that, Erlin. They may not love calculus, for example. They might not love advanced math, but they will love math. They love the concept of math because math is everywhere. It's in everything you do. It's like language. Just because I don't know Greek doesn't mean I don't love English. I love English. I don't know Greek. I don't love Greek, but I love to communicate. Children are like that. So they learn things where you put the good foundation stones. they love it to some extent. But I don't think you're ever going to let children going to say, "Oh, mom, I just hate math. I can't get through college with this." No, I think the only time you make the mistake is if you start teaching them too much math, abstract math at a very young age, and you break their spirit and they don't get it at all. And then they feel like I'm never going to get math. I'm just better off give it up. So keep that in mind. Don't exasperate the children. Just teach them early on few things in a sensory way. As you build those fundamental blocks, they will blossom. They'll start to take math on their own. They'll say, "Wow, this is great."
Yeah.
Okay. It's great, but they didn't give a lot of details. I do have concerns on this one, though, a little bit. Let me just go through each one of them. Early knowledge stage, a lot of natural and observation walks. Observe butterflies, observe the creatures around, observe the foliage around, start to take photographs, help them to start making nature albums and things like that. And when they go on to the later knowledge stage, you're starting to really do a lot of taxonomy and anatomy. Now, this is what I'm adding. I know the authors are not adding this, so I'm telling you what you can do in the science stages. So later knowledge stage is where you really teach your children how to classify, which means genre and species. You teach about, let's say, you go on exploration, you collect a particular leaf kind, or you got 10 leaf kinds. What particular leaf is this? What's the specific name for this? Are they part of a particular family of trees? The same for creatures. Learn their anatomy. So learn their taxonomy. Which class do they belong to? These different creatures. Learn the anatomy. Learn how the human body works. Learn how typically life works. Learn about cell formation. How does cell work? Structure and function. So you need to know. This is the stage where the what of science is learned. A lot about how does the universe. What is the universe? What are these planets? What is the sun? What are these different plants? What are these different animals? How does the body? What is the body like? What are the parts of the body? What are the functions of these parts? So these are things you learn in the stage. But in the next stage, remember, this is a very key foundational stage, later knowledge. The understanding stage, you're starting to ask the how and the why question. Okay. So you do a lot of observation and experimentation, which means, for example, how does the heart work? How does the heart pump blood around? Or, for example, how does matter work? What is matter? How does matter correlate with each other? And so you do a lot of experimentation, and this is where you get into physics and chemistry. So remember, physics and chemistry have to do with matter, have to do with things that you study about in a previous age. A lot of things you study about. How do they hold together? How do they work? Why do things work the way they do? Why do chemicals function the way they do? Why is it that you don't eat soda on an empty stomach? What happens to your stomach? So you're talking about chemistry and physics in these stages, and you build the basics. And then in the advanced wisdom stage is where you do advanced science. And most of the time, most of your science learning in this is project oriented, which means that you have already figured out how things work. You figured out why they work the way they work. And you're starting to solve real life problems. Okay, so for example, these are times when you can talk about, let's say, women's safety issue in India. Okay, like women are not safe if they walk out at night. There's a possibility that they could be attacked. Now, using your skills that you've learned in the previous years, can you come up with a solution to that problem? Can they wear a jacket, for example, which works on electrodes or things like that, which can protect them? Or can you come up with a kind of spray, like a pepper spray, that will help them or protect them, which is a chemistry project again. So things like that. I think you're starting to answer real life question and answering them through projects that you do. So here you do advanced math, physics, chemistry, and biology. Now, usually by this time, you're starting to develop entrepreneurial skills. If you're a scientist in your thinking, if you've learned great math, and if you've learned how to use research methods, then you're starting to really get into your own job, your own projects, and you can easily get into your own business, start your own business, or perhaps be an apprenticeship at this time. I do think technology has not even been talked about in this whole book. I don't know why, but it's important that you start technology. You start to teach technology from the earlier ages. Expose them to computers, to gadgets, maybe in a limited sense in their early years, but start teaching them what it means to code. It's a language that they learn on their own, a machine language, and then teach them how to solve problems as they get to the wisdom stage. So it would kind of be similar to this, but you're working with a machine language instead of a Greek or a Hebrew language, a human language, and you're working your way through it. Again, let me finish this and then you ask questions, okay? History, they've said a lot about history. The main thing to know about history is build your history timeline. Have a wall chart with a timeline. So early ages, you're building a biblical history timeline. So you tell them as you go through biblical stories and you're doing your biblical education, you're talking about the covenant story, put a timeline along with it so they know when it's happening. And then once they go through actual history education through that Streams of Civilization book or whatever, you start to put major events there and start to, as you're reading historical biographies, you start to put them on the timeline. But in the understanding age, now in the knowledge age, you're really talking about what happened. And in the understanding age, you're starting to ask more deeper questions of history. Why did this happen? What are the social, economic, political factors that led to a historical event? So you're really getting to cause-effect study. The authors, again, don't mention this. I am telling you, this is one way to look at history. You do need to get into interpretation of history, that why things happen the way they happen. You have to start to develop that apparatus. And in wisdom's level, you're going to start reading all kinds of history, like, more complex histories. But you're also going to get into something called historiography, which means ways of reading history. There's a Marxist historiography, there's Christian historiography, there are other kinds of historiography. But you realize that when you start to have a certain philosophy of life, you're going to start looking at history a certain way. And so you start to also read history with that lens in mind. And you start to gain what's called a Christian historiography. How is God working through history? So what does this all mean? And you can also start doing your own historical research at this time. Okay. Music and art, again, early knowledge stage is mostly sensory learning. You learn to play, you learn to listen, sing, exercise your senses, just get exposed to a lot of different kinds of musical instrument. Give them a love for these things. Take them to musical concerts, for example. Help them to just feel, instruments. But in the later knowledge stage, they can really start to learn to sight read, learn notations, basics of an instrument. And with art, they can learn different media. In the early knowledge, they're just learning to play, paint, do all of that. But later knowledge is starting to gain structure, pencil drawing. They learn how to draw lines, perspective, things like that start to come in. And in the understanding level, they're starting to gain skill in that particular instrument or art. So, for example, in art, they would start to get into copying still life art, which means they've learned how to master the pencil. So they learn to work with the pencil on still life art. Or let's say they mastered watercolor, they look at a particular portrait and just copy it, or a particular landscape and copy it. And with music, they learn to start performing pieces with that instrument. They have to learn how to perform. By the time they get to the wisdom stage, they're starting to become composers themselves, which means they have to get into creative composition. Now that they've mastered what it means to repeat things, to gain the skill to do something, they learn to start interpreting either art or music, appreciate art or music, and start to compose their own art or music. So that's that. I haven't written logic because I think she's gone through that mostly in the understanding and wisdom stage. Any questions or any comments, anything you want to add? This is the summary of all these chapters. Did you have any questions or any thoughts to add? Yes, so there. Is that Erlen? Yeah, what were you saying, Erlen?
No, I said, no, I don't have anything to add or.
Yeah, is it clear the way I'm kind of looking at science and music and art? I mean, I know the authors have not done a lot of justice to those two, which is why you'll probably have to do your homework. There's just so much to do in music, art, and science. I just don't want your children to miss out on the things they can do, especially especially in science, in these three particular fields. Again, history reading is great, but like I said, I think most of them, they've written the curriculum, their book in such a way that they're shaping political leaders, quote unquote, or Christian leaders, which is typically where you would head if you're having this emphasis. But I do want to see scientists as children as being scientists, mathematicians, linguists or journalists, mass media folks, musicians, artists. We need people who can shape culture in these different fashions as well. Dilip, did you have any thoughts to add? Anything I'm missing out? Any observations or critical comments you have? Anything at all? Dilip? Maybe he's not there. Okay, so I think that is that. So we are done with the book. And so Erlen, I gave you a rundown of all the chapters you missed, because you can go back and read them and you'll just get the details, but I'm pretty sure you're going to forget it by the time Kyria turns 13 or 15 and you have to read the book. So, but keep this, I've shared this with you as an Excel sheet. Anytime you want to add to it, or you want to add your own list of things, or you want to shrink it down to a schedule you can maintain, use the sheet which I've given you, make it your own, chop and change, so that if you want to do the trivium with your children, what does it take for you to do? So you have an idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Stop sharing my screen. Dilip, are you still there? Are you logged off?
So sorry, just had to, so power failure as well, and then, sorry.
No problem. I just was asking, did you have any, let me go back to my screen, or you can keep your Excel sheet open before you. Any thoughts, questions, comments, anything you had on? Were you there when I shared about the whole thing through music and art?
Yeah, I missed the music and art though, but but no, overall, it's fine. I mean, just one concern, because previously I've read that homeschooling kids are 1 or 2 years ahead of others, and then they're able to go to college by 15 or 16.
Mm-hmm.
So is that true in this? Because I get the sense that this also almost takes the same time. Because we focus on where they are good, right?
See,
so
I think we should not compare Indian education system with American education system. See, American schools are pretty slow in terms of that. They're not the best. American colleges are better than their schools, but American schooling system is not the greatest. So homeschoolers do, I think, excel a lot more than the people who go to regular schools there. But in India, we are a cramming generation. We are a very competitive culture. So you're going to see a slightly different trend in schools in India. You're going to see kids starting very early, 3 years, 4 years. They're going to start learning languages when they're 4 or 5. So compared to that, you're going to find that homeschoolers will seem that they're behind. Okay, so I'm just gently warning you on that. I would recommend that you don't compare your children's education with the kids who go to school, because they are crammers. They're probably going to be way ahead in terms of their what they're teaching in schools, but that doesn't mean that comprehension level is way ahead, or their understanding, the wisdom level is way ahead. You get it? If you don't put the right foundations in place early on, your building is going to fall. We know that from the scriptures, right? What's the point in building a tall structure with a pretty flimsy foundation? When they go to college, it's going to crumble and fall. And I think we're all examples of that, right? We've had pretty bad foundations, so when we went to college, we just crumbled. We couldn't take the pressure of college, the pressure of math education in college. But if you lay the right foundations, even if they're behind, by the time they're 13 or 14, they're going to pick it up. Okay, they're going to quickly start to grasp the abstract concepts. So my encouragement would be, try not to compare your children in their homeschooling stages with the kids who are going out to school, because you will get discouraged and disappointed. But I would say focus on your child. Focus on your child's ability, their capacity, their potential, their interest. Help them to become a lover of learning. The word for that is philomath. Help them to become a philomath, a lover of learning.
Right.
If they love to learn, if they just enjoy God and His created world, they will take on they will take on at some point, and that tipping point will happen at different stages with the different kids. So just build those important foundations. Just try not to compare them with children in other schools. Give them some time to grow. I think at about 13 or 14 years of age, you need to start asking important questions. Okay, now how do I help my kids? They're still not moving forward in a particular direction. Pray for them.
Right.
Engage them. Ask them, what are you struggling with? How can I help you? But not in the early stages, not in the early knowledge stages. Until they're 10. I know I'm going to be way behind when I start with my kiddo. He's about 8, but his development is only about 5 or 6 years of age. But I'm not so bothered because, see, my goal is not to send him off to the best college. My goal is to help him love God and help him to love the world he's created. And so I'm going to start where he is and help him grow through his phases. So I think that's what I would encourage you all to do as well.
Sure.
Okay, so if that's that, let's stop the screen and close in prayer. Erden, could you lead us in just close in prayer for us?
Sure. Our loving Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for the time that we had now going through the last chapters of this book. We thank you for helping us to complete this book study, helping a few of us here to meet, though we couldn't do it so regularly, but thank you for helping us complete it, Lord. We pray that this study would really be a blessing even as we plan to homeschool our children, and that the people we have befriended here and this group will continue to be of help to us in the homeschooling journey as well. Give us a blessed Lord's Day tomorrow, Lord, and help us through the week. We ask all this in Jesus' precious name.
Amen. All right, let me start the